We're delighted to be joined this evening by Jessica Light, aka the Tassel Queen of Bethnal Green. Jessica is London's last working passementerie weaver and maker, and one of the last of a long line of passementeriers to be trained within what is now an extinct London industry. She's known for making innovative, design-led passementerie that is hand-woven and handmade in to order in her East London workshop using techniques dating back to the 16th century. Jessica considers all the elements from colour to material to concept to creating unique collections of tassels, trims. Oh, sorry, just letting people in there. Tassels, trims, tiebacks, rosettes, and one-off bespoke pieces. She uses these historic skills as a means to create original passementerie designs that go beyond the traditions of perceived passementerie and look to the future. Hi, Jessica, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us and a beautiful location with your loom behind you.
I know, I'm still in the workshop. I'm always still in the workshop. So yes, that's the star of the show behind me. That's my loom.
Fantastic, and we'll hear a lot more about that shortly. But let's start off at the beginning. Could you tell us about what your childhood was like? Were you a particularly creative child? And if so, how did that manifest as a young person?
Yes, I was. I mean, I've been making as long as I can remember. Ever since I was a child, I learnt to sew, I learnt to knit. Actually, I didn't learn to crochet, and I used to make my own toys. And then when I was about 14, I made my own clothes. And I've just always made things. I mean, one of my school friends said to me recently, she said, "Do you remember when we were teenagers and you spent that whole year in your room and wouldn't come out and you didn't go to school and we used to come and see you after school but you were always just making stuff." And that was what I did. So I didn't really enjoy school very much, and I spent a lot of time sort of. I was also being teased the whole time because I spent a lot of time in the John Lewis fabric department, which at those days was the whole ground floor. So they'd be going off, doing something very teenagery, and I'd be looking at silks or something. So yeah, I've always been creative.
Fantastic. And how did that evolve as you moved into adulthood? Was passementerie your first kind of arrival for your creative life, or did you do
Uh,
something first?
well, I did textiles at college, and we did I did a BA in textile design, and we did knit, weave, print, and embroidery. And the minute I got behind a loom, that was it. I just wanted to kind of weave. It just really suited me, and I loved it. And I wanted to carry on weaving when I left college. And one of the visiting tutors suggested to me, because my final degree show was a collection of silk ribbons, that I went to see Wendy Cushing, who did this thing called passementerie. And I was like, I don't know what that is. What's that? And so, yeah, so when I left college, I probably kind of sort of I went to see her with my portfolio. And at that point, she didn't have any openings. So I went off to New York for a bit. And when I came back, she had a job. So I went to work for her. And that's how I got into it, really. I had no idea it existed. Um, and it was just like entering this magic world. And she had a workshop in Bethnal, in Three Courts Lane in Bethnal Green, which was off Weavers Fields. Um, and I just in my diary, this was what, 1990, I think. I wrote, "This is my job," and here we are.
Amazing. And how was the transition to that first discovery to actually making it your job? Did you work alongside her or did
Well,
you
at that point, she had, I mean, she had five hand weavers and two what we call table makers, people who make the tassels and the embellishments. So we were, she was, Wendy was amazing because she helped kind of that sort of transition from she trained at Sindels, which was one of the famous East End passementerie companies that kind of went back to the early 19th century. Um, and so she kind of helped transition it, moving forward. But also, she was doing a lot of restoration work at that point as well. So I got to learn all of the sort of techniques from this 15th, 16th century onwards, because we were doing things like Hampton Court and Windsor Castle. I did the samples, but I refused to actually weave them because they were so difficult. But yeah, so I had an amazing training and I worked with her for about 6 years. And basically, I was just sitting there weaving meterage, and learning all these techniques. And it was an incredible training.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good grounding and something that a lot of makers coming into crafts today don't really have because they're so rare and they have to teach themselves or have short courses or kind of beg and borrow makers' time here and there to pass on some skills.
I think so. I think, yeah. I mean, it's learning on the job is amazing because you have to pick up things quite quickly because you're being paid to make this stuff. And it was just it also kind of getting, when you're working on sort of handmade production, it really hones your skills. And Wendy she had three which 19th century passementerie looms that she'd been that Sindels had given her, because by that point Sindels had closed. So I actually learnt to weave on the proper passementerie looms. I mean, they're amazing looms, they're absolutely beautiful, and they're really fast. You can go really fast on a passementerie loom. And it was such a good grounding. And yeah, I mean that I there isn't really anything like that today, I don't think. And at that point, you see, it wasn't really considered a craft. It was an industry. It was a trade. And so it didn't really become this idea of a kind of a craft until the Endangered Heritage Crafts sort of list came out. I think that was the first time that, it had been really thought of as a craft, because now it is just individual makers. I mean, there are companies still left in the UK, but as far as that kind of handmade thing goes, it's down to kind of individuals now. But working in that kind of collective is incredible because you're working with other people who you kind of feed off. If you have an issue with your loom, I'd go and find Cecil, who would be sort of somewhere kind of what's happened here, and he'd go off and make me a new piece for the loom. I mean, it was, and also meeting those people, because I met old Mr. Sindel. I mean, he's long gone now, but the last kind of Sindel's practitioner. And I met all of these people who'd been had been their life's work. They didn't go into it because they were artistic or creative. It was their job. It was their 9 to 5 job. I mean, one of the best tassel makers I ever met was this boy called Gary, who, when I first went to work for Wendy, he was a 16-year-old and he left school with hardly any kind of qualifications. East End boy, went into the job centre, saw this job, thought, oh, I'll have a go at that. Turned out to be one of the best tassel makers ever. And so it's also about that kind of sort of, not just the opportunity for people who are creative, but also for people who don't get that opportunity to perhaps go to art school. Or, I mean, Wendy actually didn't like employing people from art schools because they were a bit of a pain in the for her, because they want to be creative, and actually what she wanted was people to just sit there and do that. But I actually quite like doing production. I like repetition, so it makes me feel secure. And so that didn't bother me, but it was an extraordinary, and the people that I learned from were just, I mean, their skills are that they don't have those skills any longer. I mean, I don't know everything that they knew. I wasn't taught everything, and they're gone now, so that's
Mhm.
it, really.
Yeah.
But it was an incredible grounding and an incredible beginning and introduction.
Yeah, we've seen that transition so often in ceramics and glass of an industrial activity becoming more of a studio craft. And many of those skills go across with that transition. But I think in terms of the experience of production, of producing something the same again and again, there's lots of learning and knowledge that comes with that that m may have been lost along the way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think handmade production, you have to have a certain attitude about it, because it is, it can be quite boring and it can be,
Mhm.
quite monotonous. And so you need to have a certain skill, sort of, I guess, mentally, to be able to do that. And I actually find it really quite difficult to find people who want to do that kind of work, because everyone wants to do the nice bits, the creative bit. They don't want to sit there and go, okay, now I want you to go and make 100 tassels. And they're like, oh, but I want to make this beautiful, great big thing. And it's like, well, the reality of actually, making a living at passementerie is the handmade production side of it. That's what I make a lot of my income from. I do get the one-off creations and the one-off commissions, and they're wonderful. But the reality is that that's how I keep going really, by making, I mean, like I was saying to you earlier, I've got an order for 175 tassels to be done by the end of May, as well as this week I've got 10 tiebacks for one brand, and then four bespoke tiebacks for another interior designer, plus a few little sort of woven things for, and so, there's a lot there.
Yeah, definitely. It also strikes me what you were saying about the young man who just happened to work in the factory because he was local and needed a job, but then finds a really hidden skill and they become absolute masters of their craft. Makes you wonder how many people in society have this within them to be an absolute master at something, but it just never has the opportunity to manifest itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is that passementerie is a traditional East End trade. It goes back to the Huguenots. And, so therefore, all the people who worked in it were local East Enders. And it wasn't just passementerie. You had silk weaving, you had cabinet making, you had wood turning, you had shoemaking. So you had all of these trades that were teaching people, just, local people, how to make extraordinary things. And I think that's the thing. It's like, the people that I worked with at Wendy's, and it was just their job, and yet there they were with the most incredible skills. I mean, it was very grounding, really. I mean, it's like I would never have gone in and kind of been, oh, I'm a creative, because they would have just gone, laughed me off my loom and go, go and weave another 10 meters, please. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's a
absolutely.
shame, really, because I think it means that there's a disconnection between,
Mhm.
what people think craft is, and people who work in craft, and actually kind of the general public. Because originally it was the general public who was making all this stuff, really.
Yes, yes. I think the definition of creativity has shifted because it would have been about actually making something and having it to look at the end of the day. It wasn't necessarily about the artistic muse and waiting for creativity to
Yeah,
land.
no, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you've kind of touched on a little bit on the next question about your location in East London and relation to the Huguenots. So how does that influence your practice, that kind of lineage that's behind you?
Um, there's a kind of Um, I mean, I often say to people, if I woke up in Jacobean England, I could actually go and get a job because I have the same skills. And I think there's that connection with history. I mean, I'm a bit of history geek anyway. So the fact that, I have this thing that, that I don't know, there's that just amazing feeling of that sort of continuation of all of the people that have gone before me and hopefully will come after me, of doing this extraordinary, making these extraordinary sort of decorations, really, because that's what passementerie is, and its history, and what it was about sort of historically, and its intrinsic value, which it doesn't really have anymore. But it was really huge, in that it denoted your wealth and your power. It was used a lot in sort of religion because, again, it was that sort of whole sort of iconography of sort of beauty and power and wealth. And, I think that there is this, I really love that feeling of that sort of continuation, that I have this kind of one foot in the past and hopefully one foot in the future. So I think being here, because I mean, I've been in the East End now since 1989, which is a long time. And seeing how much it's changed from when I first came here, which it has. I mean, a lot of it's unrecognizable. And I mean, I also, after I worked with Wendy, I went to work freelance for Turner's, Brian Turner, who retired last year. And he also had that lineage as well, because I think it was his great grandfather who started Turner's, and they were off Dalston, which is up in Hackney at that point. And that was really fascinating because, although it's, again, it's passementerie, they did things very slightly differently. because each little company had their own way of doing things, and that's really amazing too. So each, although they're similar, they might have different names, or their weaver slightly did a different thing, and I think that again, it's really sad that a lot of that hasn't been documented as far as the kind of difference in each little company or each factory, how they did things. Yeah, it's very inspiring. I mean, I think East End now isn't so much, it's very, sort of it's quite posh now, really, as it compared to what it used to be. Um, but there is that I have a big affinity with it. I don't think I would really like to work anywhere else.
Yeah, it has changed a lot, and people talk a lot about gentrification and kind of small businesses being, or traditional businesses being pushed out by rising rates and things. So it must be a
Yeah.
struggle for many family businesses and traditional workshops.
Well, I
Um,
mean, a lot of them have gone now. I mean,
yeah.
even sort of the people who, started when I was first came here, you had a lot of the sort of YBAs, like people like sort of Tracy Emin and people like that
Mhm.
who had like studios here. And even sort of my visiting tutors had, their weave studios here. They're all gone now, you know. And so have all the passementerie factories, they've all gone,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the silk weaving, it's just not there any longer.
yeah,
And also the cabinet making, because I mean, on Hackney Road, there were a lot of sort of woodworking places. They've all gone now.
yeah. Such a shame. But what you were saying about the slight differences between different workshops, ways of doing things, is really interesting how those differences get ingrained within people's practice, and you can see how that would have been kind of passed on throughout history from maker to apprentice. And yeah, it's all about that lineage that we're here to support heritage crafts and ensure that that can continue to the next generation. But tracking it back is just fascinating, and I'm sure there's lots of information that's been lost along the way, but perhaps lots of opportunities to look through records and archives and see how
Yeah.
those skills have been passed on from the past.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Just to remind the audience that please do use the chat, do ask any questions for Jessica, and we will try and pick up on some of them at the end. So if you've got a burning question, please do type it in. Jessica, you've sent through some pictures, and it would be a shame not to show them with it being such a visual craft. So I will share my screen, and maybe you can talk us through a few of them before we get back to the questions. Bear with me. Zoom isn't always the fastest. Let me know when you can see that.
So this is kind of the beginning of it. So this is my collection, my degree collection from college of the ribbons that sort of started the whole passementerie thing. If you go on to the next one. And these are some pictures of actual passementerie looms, which are really different from normal looms. So they work on a pulley system, and you can see the pulleys and a box right at the top of the loom. They're very tall, they're very narrow. Don't have very many shafts as such because most passementerie is it's all plain weave, the majority of it, and any patterning that you do comes through with sort of what we used to call in the trade lays, which is extra warp, which would be put on sort of weighted heddles at the front of the shafts. At the back, you can see the tray on the left hand right hand side, you can see a tray which like with rolling pins. Those where the warps went, because a lot of passementerie weaving is all about tension. So each warp would be put on a different roller. And that meant you could also put lots of kind of extra warps on as well. And they would all be weighted with counterbalance weights, which would kind of move around. So it was really easy to help with the tension because when you're weaving something like a fringe, you would have one warp at a tighter tension, the other, so you could really beat it up. If we look at the picture on the left-hand side, this is a picture by Richard Avedon, actually, from a French passementerie company in the 60s. And if you can see the weaver, he's almost standing up because they're very tall, these looms. And you can see he's got a neck brace because you're actually sort of really over the weave. We used to have sort of chest rests. And the reason for that is because passementerie looms were developed pre-industrial revolution so that you could actually put this thing into production. So you could weave really quickly on passementerie looms because they're so light and the batten was always sprung forward. So it's almost like you're cycling. If you think of a sort of a racer, they're right over their bike. That's what you were doing when you were weaving. And the sort of the average you could weave was about 4 meters an hour. My record on one of these looms is 7 meters an hour. We had a rush job, and literally, I was weaving so fast that the loom started sort of moving across the floor, and all the boys from the rope walk came up to watch because, oh my God, she's off. Because I love I'm a speed weaver. I'm not really a slow maker. I like to make fast, and I like to, and I love weaving fast. And these were just beautiful looms to weave on. They were really incredible. And as you can also see, is that they're treadle looms. So they are, and the treadles, you had about 6 treadles, and you would position them so that you could almost use your feet to kind of move along and move back if you were sort of say doing a fan edge. And so you were doing, you had 2 like that, and then you just move your foot back. Yeah, they were all about speed, passementerie looms. Next. And then these are just some things, some sort of paraphernalia. This is really interesting because this is, oh yeah, so those little reeds. So if you just want to go back
Yeah.
to, so the reed on the left-hand side is what we called an adjustable reed so that because we used to use what we call dummy warps to kind of create loops going on the edges of your braids, and so those dummy warps would often be wires. So you wanted a wider dent than sort of everything else. So you could move these around. And then on the right hand side, we've got some passementerie shuttles. The top 2 are for weaving gimps. So you've got 2 and 3 bobbins in there. So you could have 2 or 3 gimp cords coming out. You can go on to the next one. So this is passementerie technical notation, and as you can see, it's very different from normal weaving technical notation. It's a kind of written shorthand. And that's all you needed to be able to create those little samples there. In fact, you could give that to a weaver and you wouldn't necessarily need to give them a sample because it's all there. You've got the warps at the top, so you can see that we separate the warps so that one warp would be on one shaft and the other warp would be on the other shaft. So you'd be making 2 warps. And then you can see the reading instructions there, and also the kind of mix of the weft as well. I haven't got the top one, which is a fan edge. It hasn't got the treadle sequence on there. That would be on the other side. But you can see it's a completely different technical notation. And it does weavers' heads in, I have to say. I must say, I think also it's really simple. It's much more simple than sort of drafting a weave. But yeah, so it meant that you could give that to the weaver and they could put it on the loom really quickly and get going without having to sort of really sit down and work everything out all the time. Next slide. And this is my workshop. So this is me in my workshop and sort of my loom and me weaving something and just some stuff really. And there we go again. So as you can see, it's not a pristine space. It's completely chaotic. I do work out of chaos. I find kind of really tidy. I'm actually very messy, and I find tidy spaces slightly, they make me anxious. So I like mess. It makes me feel kind of comfortable. And there's just so much there. I mean, there's 30 years worth of stuff. And on the right hand side is my loom, which I think we did. Was there a question about my loom?
Yes,
If
should we
we could
come
go
on
into
to
that,
that
that would
now?
be, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll come out of the share for now. Well, there's a question in the chat actually from Penny, which might lead into this, and she asks what's happened to all the commercial looms, so all the ones that were in the production lines.
Yeah, there's a good one. 2 of them are in Wendy's attic, Wendy Cushion's attic in bits. One of them, one of the other 19th century one went to no, I always get them muddled up. I think it's Trimmings by Design in Derby because we trained them. So they took one of our looms. And then Wendy had 2 other looms, which I don't know what happened to those. I don't think she has them anymore. They were new ones. She'd had them made. I know someone who retired last year, and she did have her loom up for sale. Her passementerie loom, which she'd had made. Unfortunately, it was too expensive. I couldn't afford to buy it. I mean, I did think of actually asking you, but even that wouldn't have covered it. So I couldn't find the rest of the money. So I don't really know where that went. Um, and then I know that what's her name? Oh God, sorry, I've got the brain of a sieve these days. Then there's Julie Hedges. Is it Julie Hedges?
We
Who's
hedges.
one of our not Julie Hedges, it's Claire Hedges. She's got a
Okay.
passementerie
There
loom.
it
And then, but there is another woman called Julie who isn't, you wouldn't know about, but she's one of the most amazing weavers, actually. Passementerie weavers. She was weaving for Wendy very early on, and I think she still weaves for Wendy, and she had a loom made. Apart from that, I mean, I know that there's quite a lot of sort of mechanical looms in sort of some of the companies like Heritage Trimmings, but there are very few actual hand looms, passementerie hand looms left now. You wouldn't really be able to buy one. You'd probably have to get it made.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I kind of keep, Wendy, you know that loom in your attic. Anyway, I'm trying to get her to, I think she should get them out really.
So your loom, your mid 19th century loom, I understand you acquired it about 30 years ago at a car boot sale for about
I I
£100. Is that
did,
right?
yes,
How did
that's
that come
very
about?
true. Well, my mother has a friend who is the most amazing shopper that you've ever met, and spends a lot of time at cart boot sales. And she rang me up saying, "There's someone here with a loom, and they want to sell it for £100, and they're happy to deliver it. Do you want it?" And I kind of went, "Oh yeah, yeah, all right then." Not knowing what it would be like or anything, but I just figured, well, £100 for a loom is pretty good. And so it turned up in bits, and and there were lots of other bits as well. I think there was even, and I don't know what happened to it because I wanted to give it to someone, but I think there was even a 19th century tablet loom actually, and I need to find it, but I've got a nasty feeling that it's gone maybe years ago. And so I got put it together. It needed a few new things, and I was doing a weaving demonstration for Chelsea Design Week. This is quite a long time ago now, and one of the experts from Antiques Roadshow just happened to walk through and said, "What an amazing piece!" And he was the one who dated it as mid 19th century. So yeah, it's quite old. It's and it's not a proper passementerie loom. It's a counterbalance um treadle loom, but it serves me well. I mean, I've been weaving on it for over 30 years now, and it's still going, sort of.
Is it temperamental? Do you have to, is there a
Uh,
secret to getting the best from it?
it can be, I think when we've been doing a lot of weaving, we both get a bit tired. I just a good kick.
Okay.
I mean, I have to every now and again, I have to kind of re-string it and re give it, recalibrate it a bit. But it's an amazing thing because it's so beautifully made that it just keeps going. It just, it doesn't really need an awful lot because it's a wonderfully designed piece of equipment, piece of machinery, and it's just there it is. I mean, bits of it are held together with string, but and tape and stuff, but it's still going.
Wonderful. Just saw the message from Ray in the chat. As well as working for Heritage Crafts, Ray is also a weaver, as well as being called Ray Weaver. And her partner Eric made her loom, and
Wow.
they kind of learnt weaving together on it. So yeah, if anybody wants to commission a passementerie loom, I'm sure Eric would be happy to have a go.
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, that would be amazing. I'll have to think, well, I have to get some more funding, won't I?
Well, yeah. Maybe we can link you up with a funder if we can't help ourselves. So yeah, so you in the past you've used the phrase anarchic sensibility to describe your approach to passementerie. Could you describe what anarchy looks like on the loom? How do
Um,
you decide which rules to break and which ones to honor?
well, I didn't actually coin that phrase. That was a
Okay.
journalist for an article that was in How to Spend It magazine a few years ago, and I
Typical journalist putting words in your mouth.
but I quite like that. And I think that, when I set my business up in 2008, I kind of knew that I knew because I've been working in passementerie for such a long time, I knew there was a gap in the market for something that was a bit different. Because at that point, all that was out there was the very traditional stuff, which is beautiful and amazing. But I didn't feel there was point me doing that as well because there were people already doing it and doing it really incredibly well. Um, or there was a lot of very kind of feathery, quite crystally, blingy stuff. And I think also it's just the nature of how I work anyway. I don't think it's necessarily to do with me looking at passementerie and like, oh, how am I going to change this? I think it's just how I create things, and I just I brought in quite a lot of color. At that point, there wasn't a lot of color in passementerie. So I play with scale, I play with materials. You're just as likely to find me in a kind of in a hardware store than as in a sort of yarn shop because there's amazing materials there. Um, and I just was playing around with all sorts of things really. Um, and I think that perhaps I don't really look at a lot of passementerie for inspiration. My inspiration comes from other things. I kind of see passementerie as a sort of tool to kind of create things with. I don't really kind of I don't know if I'm articulating this well, but it's like painting. It's like a paint box for me, and I kind of think I'd like to create something that looks like that. I could use that technique or that technique. Um, I think that sort of at the moment it's like there are lots of people sort of doing the same kind of thing with this, like that kind of idea of sort of heritage craft with a contemporary kind of aesthetic. But when I first started, which was my brand identity, there really wasn't anything. And my idea was I want to get people who've never used passementerie to use it. So I was sending stuff to people specifically because I like their work, not because they use passementerie. And I did actually get a lot of people coming, well, we've never used it because there wasn't anything to use. And I wanted it to be a lot more sort of design led and a bit more sort of graphic, looking at lots of different kind of colors. Colors very important to me, and color combinations are very important to me. So yeah, I think it's a case of that that it's sort of anarchic sensibility. Um, I mean, I quite like a bit of anarchy, I guess, there's nothing wrong with it. And I quite like the idea of subverting things that perhaps should be really traditional.
And I hadn't planned to ask this, but have you seen or are you seeing a transition from passementerie in interiors and furnishing to fashion? Is it replicating that kind of anarchic approach to fashion?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with fashion because handmade passementerie isn't used a lot in fashion, actually, because it's so expensive. And what they use in fashion, I mean, I've worked quite a lot in fashion in the past, is they tend to go for a lot of fringes. And whereas they could do a lot of things with passementerie that are really interesting. I mean, I really recently did, I know you lectured at Makers Camp, CSM Makers Camp, which is where they take their fashion students out of the college and put them in a location. And they're only allowed to use dead stock or waste materials. And that was really wonderful, I have to say. I came away very, very kind of feeling very hopeful and sort of optimistic about because of the way that they were thinking, the students using the techniques, to be creative and looking at it from a fashion context. I've recently gone back into fashion a bit more. I mean, I did some things for some tassels for a designer called Connor Ives, who's sort of quite sort of the thing at the minute. And so that was actually quite interesting going back into fashion because I stopped doing it because some of them, because it got a little bit dull for me because it was all they wanted was, I mean, apart from working with Vivienne Westwood, that was amazing. But I think I think there's an opening there. I think that, somebody could go away and start looking at doing passementerie in fashion. You know, I do. I think that's something that hasn't really been um, looked at, perhaps.
Yeah, I think there's enormous scope for it. We did a symposium at De Montfort University last year. We were talking about passementerie and they were really excited about it. So hopefully they'll start reaching out
Yeah.
to practitioners.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was the thing. It's like, if these kind of students start sort of using, bringing them those things into their work. And also because you're teaching them about sort of, they might not actually use the techniques themselves, but because you give them an understanding of how it works and what they can do with it. I think that could be really exciting. Yeah.
Fantastic. Just going back into the chat, we've got a question from Alison Pascoe, who's one of our bursary recipients, who started out in macrame and other kind of fiber crafts and is now learning and has learned passementerie techniques. So she says, any advice for an individual textile artist or maker currently learning the skills of passementerie and hoping to incorporate it into their existing business or practice?
Sorry, could you say that any kind of advice?
Yeah, any advice?
That's sort of I mean, it depends what you want to do with it. I think really what the thing that I think is really important here is that you need to find your own niche. You need to be bringing something to it that's new and that's something that someone isn't doing, because the thing is, if it's such a tiny market and it's already quite a crowded market, and you are competing not only against other makers but also like big brands like Samuel and Sons, but also things made in India and China. So you really need to make a niche for yourself that brings in new customers, that so you're not chasing what's existing, because that means that no one's really going to get anything out of it. I think my advice would be to really have a look at the market of it and really kind of do some research into kind of sort of designers, or look at who you want to work with. Do you want to work with interiors or fashion, or do you want to kind of be more sort of art based? So what you want to do is to look at people who would potentially be your customers. Don't have to be interested in passementerie, but if you like what they're doing, if you think, well, my work really works with that, then contact them. They can only chuck it in the bin. And, but I mean, that's what I did when I first started. I did a little kind of booklet. I just sent it to all of these designers that I liked. And some of them got back to me the next day. And I mean, I had one who didn't contact me for 5 years. And then suddenly they came out, oh, we've been looking for something. We love it, but we haven't had anything for it. And I know that it's difficult to kind of train and everything because there's very little opportunity for that. Um, but I think, there's certainly more books coming out. I mean, and I think that it's a case of honing your craft as well. I mean, go away and really practice it and find your voice with it, find your identity with it, and don't really look what anyone else is doing. Have that kind of sort of, this is me, this is my creativity. I want to kind of pursue that and really, go for it. And also, don't get despondent, because you do get a lot of rejection. And I know that sounds really miserable, but it is true. And you need to be quite sort of tougher. I mean, it's amazing. I've had stuff what people have said to me in the past. I've been told that, my first ever show that I did, design show at the London Design Festival, which was Tent London, the first person on my stand, which was a man, by the way, he just said, you don't belong here. You don't belong in a design show. And this was the first thing I'd ever done. And I just thought, oh my God. But I rose to it because I mean, I wasn't rude to him, but I just said, well, I disagree with you and I think you're wrong. And I don't know who that person is, but I'm still here. So, you do need to have a little bit of kind of sort of grit about it, and try and, almost blinker yourself, really. I hope that helps. It's rather long-winded.
Thanks for your question, Alison. That was great. And we'll dwell on these questions for a little bit longer before going back into the actual questions. So we've got an anonymous question here. Has a history ever been compiled of passementerie makers in the East End? And are there any good general histories of the craft you could recommend?
Now that's a very good question. And the answer to that, unfortunately, is no. There isn't really a lot of documentation. I mean, because everything was passed down. through kind of weaver to weaver, sort of table worker to table worker, and very little was written. I mean, I think my book is one of the first books that actually has the technical notation in it, the passementerie technical notation that's ever been published. And what we do have that we have to kind of look at, because when I was working with Wendy and we were doing a lot of restoration, we were working with people like kind of English Heritage and whatever the other one is. I can't remember what's the other one. Anyway, and so we'd be working with sort of his experts, textile experts, and we would be getting quite a lot from sort of paintings that they'd found of the rooms. And that's kind of what we have to look at is the paintings. There is there isn't a huge amount of original passementerie left. If you want to see a lot of 17th century passementerie, go to Knoll House because it is extraordinary. It's got the most extraordinary, I mean, it's got the most extraordinary collection of everything, actually. It's got the most extraordinary collection of Jacobean furniture in the country. Um, and, you can have a look there. That's 17th century. There are other places in the country that you can go and see it. Bills of sale. I know at Knoll they have bills of sale. Um, I think the VNA probably do as well. That's another thing. That's how we know, perhaps some of the practitioners or sort of how much it cost, what people were sort of selling it for. But there really isn't very much, it's a case of, you probably have to do a really lot of digging because nothing was really documented. I mean, it's like I've got sort of files from when I was working at Wendy's with a lot of sort of technical information in of all the sort of things that we did. But the thing is that when we got what happened with Wendy's is that we joined with another company called Wickens, who was the kind of sort of the bottom end of passementerie. I know everyone thinks that passementerie is this top end thing, but there was a sort of bottom end, the people who do the kind of barrier ropes and sort of menu tassels and things like that. Um, and when they bought out by a big American company called Conso, and they moved everything to India, all the production, and also all the sort of the specials, which is what we did, to India, they took all the technical notation and technical cards with them. So yeah, what can you do?
Thanks for your question. We'll do one more question from the chat before we go back into the others. So from Ruthie, she says she's finding the talk fascinating and inspiring.
Oh,
And a really good question from the consumer's point of view, which we don't always consider. What passementerie item would you recommend as a good starting point for incorporating into your home? Maybe a key tassel, or do you have any other suggestions if someone doesn't want to go all out and get meters of trim to start with?
yeah, that's a great question. And I think that the consumer is really the most important person in all of this, actually, to be honest. They're the people who are going to keep this going, much more than, you can train as many people as you like, but if you haven't got people to buy it, that's what kills it, really. And so what I would recommend is, yeah, I think a key tassel is a great starting point because it's a small purchase. You can put it on your drawer handles, your door handles, you wardrobes. A lot of my sort of interior designer clients, they put them on the wardrobes. They look lovely. And then that's a really good starting point, especially if you're a bit worried about bringing color in, because you can just get these little pops of color. And then, you can go from there, really, because you might then think, oh, well, I really like that. And maybe I might want a little bit of fringing on to go with that on my curtain. Or on your cushion. And there's lots of, you can actually use it in lots of really creative ways as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be an edge. You could use it as a feature on a cushion going down the middle. You could also use it kind of in ways like, rather than the bottom of a curtain. I mean, they look lovely on leading edges, sort of, on the sort of middle curtains. So yeah, I would start with a key tassel because it's not, and then, if you get bored of it, you can just hang it on your handbag. So.
Fantastic. Thank you for your question, Ruthie. So I'm going to skip forward a couple of questions. So your career has spanned from restoring the balcony drapes at Buckingham Palace to making the crystal stars on Kylie Minogue's corset for her Showgirls tour. Do you need to adjust your making mindset when moving between these very different worlds? And is there a different kind of pressure when you know that your work will be seen by millions?
Well, with the Buckingham Palace balcony fringe, I didn't actually know what it was for until after I'd woven it. I was just given a job, 40 meters of this huge kind of wool bullion fringe. And I just did it, you know. And this, I think the thing is that actually I don't really ch change my view of things. I think that everything has to be made the same, whether I'm making one little key tassel for someone to, you know, making something for royalty. You know, it's all got to have the same quality. There shouldn't be a difference. You know, because every single customer to me, whether it is just the person buying the key tassel or someone ordering hundreds of meters, it's all the same. And, you know, so I don't really, it doesn't, I mean, every job is different anyway. So whether it's, you know, making beaded stars or, you know, doing tassel, I did some tassels for Hollywood Palace. It's all, it's just another dimension to it. And it's, so that's what is such a, why it's such a wonderful job, because everything is different. Every job is different pretty much. Um, so yeah, I don't really see a difference personally.
Yeah, I think that reflects the kind of production mindset that we see in a lot of other semi-industrial crafts.
Yeah.
Just the challenge of what you've got in front of you. It's not necessarily what the end use will be.
Yeah, no, exactly. And quite a lot of the time, I don't actually know where it's going.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, although people say, "Oh, we'll send you pictures," I never do. I never do. So it's quite rare, you know, unless I'm actually dealing with, you know, the client directly. You know, I'm often with interior designers. You know, I know that some of the people they work with are you know really famous, but I wouldn't know who they are because I'm not allowed to know. It's a bit like, you know, it's a bit like kind of being a lawyer or something, you know, it's all kind of very confidential. And, you know, I have to sign quite a lot of, you know, those ND.
NDAs.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
you know, I had to sign one recently. So, yeah.
Well, it's a shame in a way that you don't get the credit for the work if you have to sign a secrecy agreement.
Well, I think well, I mean, it's not that about the credit, it's more about
Hmm.
sort of who it's for, you know,
Yeah.
really. But, you know, I kind of feel for me, that thing about credit is that actually that it's my customers who give me the credit. It's the
Hmm.
people who buy it because I'm always amazed that anyone buys it, to be honest. You know, I mean, I make it because it's something that I love. And then the fact that other people buy it is I mean I still, you know, find it extraordinary that and they do, which is wonderful because, you know, I wouldn't be here if they didn't. But they are the most important people, really. They're much more important than anyone else.
Absolutely. So we've already touched on this a little bit, but unfortunately, passementerie is considered endangered on the red list of endangered crafts. And we've kind of talked a little bit about the changing landscape. But how would you summarize the biggest factor contributing to its current reduced state?
Um, I think uh I think really, you know, I mean from a sort of I think it started really going downhill sort of with two things, which was the Industrial Revolution and modernism. You know, I think both of those kind of put a sort of a little bit of a sort of and with modernism especially sort of from the sort of 40s onwards, you know, passementerie really wasn't kind of in fashion. And I think so a lot of it is to do with kind of fashion really. It had a brief spell in the 80s, which is when Wendy was working. And so that's why we were doing so she had, you know, a really kind of healthy number of people working in her workshop. um, I think what happened is that especially in London, I think when they closed the factory, because at that point we were in Leytonstone, and moved everything to India, there wasn't anything to replace it. And at that point, the specials, which is the kind of bespoke side of it, which was what I was working in, was doing really quite well. And I often wonder if they kept that going because they moved it to India and it didn't work in India because actually it works really well having it close to your clients so they can come and actually physically look at things, look at materials, look at samples. If that perhaps it wouldn't be in the sort of position that it is now. Because when Wendy's closed, And there was one other company whose name I can't remember who they retired. And then that was just left Turner's in the East End and in London, actually, in fact. And I think it just shrunk. And I think in that period is that people became very used to stock ranges, to things that were mass produced. And I think that there's still an issue with that now, in that, in fact, I was talking to one of my clients about this, in that, she said to me that she actually gets quite anxious commissioning things that are made to order. And she likes stock because it gives her sense of security. I mean, I quite understand that, because basically you're paying money for something that doesn't exist, hasn't been made yet. So somehow I think we need to, I think that there has to be a re-education of how people consume. I mean, generally anyway, we do have to change the way we consume because of what's happening, with global warming and sort of climate change and the huge waste that we create with mass production. But I do think there needs to be as an education. Somehow we need to kind of make people comfortable to buy what we do. And I don't know how we do that. And I think that that for me is an issue, because if there's a lot of interest in passementerie, there's a lot of interest in heritage crafts. But I do think there's a disconnect between us and for want of a better description, the general public, in that so much onus to keep these going is on us, and it's quite pressured, and you sort of think, well, can you just give me a break? I just want to do my job. And I think that the general public slightly passed the buck a little bit by sort of going, oh, well, you just need to get an apprentice, or or an intern. That's all you need to do, or get some funding. Someone actually said, oh, ask the Heritage Craft, they throw money at people. And I said, well, actually, they don't. And funding is really competitive. But I also think we shouldn't be relying on funding. I think we should be, trying to get people to understand they need to buy from us so that we can create businesses that sustain and don't need to rely on funding. So yeah, I think it's a lot to do with fashion. It's a lot to do with cost. It's a lot to do with that I think people just don't understand craft. I mean, I still have people going, oh, but what have you got in stock? And I don't have stock. Yeah, but what have you? We must have something. And or I need it tomorrow. Or, can you come and do a workshop, a rolling workshop teaching 50 people how to make tassels in an hour? Yeah, I'd love to do that. It would be a great thing, but not, it doesn't work.
No,
So yeah, I mean, I think that there are some problems. I think there was just a period where it just got lost and hasn't quite recovered that.
absolutely. I think there's a lot of work to do in educating the public about the value of the handmade. Penny's just made that point in the chat, especially in a world where you feel you can click on a link on
Yeah,
Amazon and have it delivered the next day, from the other side
absolutely.
of the world with all the environmental damage, and you don't
Yeah.
know the labor conditions that was involved in making that. So it's
Yeah,
all a
absolutely.
minefield.
Yeah. I
But
actually have on my website in my F and Qs that, when I say how long is it going to take? And I actually say I'm not Amazon, because I think people that they are, that's the problem, is that
Mhm.
they're so used to just having everything tomorrow, or,
Yeah.
5 minutes.
But in terms of fashion, fashion does tend to be cyclic. And we were just reflecting before we started on the little film that the Department for Culture, Media and Sport put on their Instagram of you that went viral. So what was it like having that level of interest? And do you think any of that will transfer through to sales or kind of buoying up the market?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It did actually. I mean, the weekend that came out, I took a grand on my shop.
Wow.
And what was really interesting is that half of those sales came from America, which was wonderful. They were quite happy to wait. The only people that were kind of, oh, when's my order coming, were people in this country. They didn't mind, even with the kind of tariffs. And so that was really great. And I did get some really good things from that. I got a lot of inquiries, but it got to a point where, I was getting so many DMs from people that I couldn't actually keep up with it. Um, but it was really fascinating, and I got some really wonderful comments. I mean, there was one woman who said, I really want to help, endangered heritage? What can I do? Because I think also that's the other thing is that people probably don't know what they can do. So I just said, well, you just spread the word vocally, tell people that there is this thing of endangered heritage crafts. I said, buy it. Or, and I actually said, you could join the Heritage Craft Association as a supporter. They're a charity and there are other charities and you can support them financially because that would help too. But I also think that a lot of people don't know what they can do to help. And I think that I mean, it was kind of unexpected and it was quite exciting at first, but then it just became a bit of a sort of Frankenstein's monster and it went off and all over the place. And it was a bit like I actually had to turn the phone off and put it in a drawer after a while because it was really, I can't deal with any more sort of, I'm so and so from so and so. And it's really hard because it's so lovely to have that interest. But I had so many people saying, "Oh, I really want to come and see a workshop. Can I come and see a workshop?" And I actually had to say no because it's a working space and this is my job. It's my 9 to 5. Well, no, it's not 9 to 5. It's a bit more than that, but it's really difficult to accommodate people who want to do that. And as much as I would love to let everyone in, I can't, because I've got 75 tassels to make before Monday, sort of
Oh,
thing. So
yeah.
it was, it was a really amazing experience. And it was wonderful that, so many people were supportive of it. And I think I think those sort of things, hopefully they'll make, even if it's just a few people think, ooh, and they did buy, I think I've had a really good, um, January is usually really quiet. But yeah, I mean, I had to spend a whole week packing at one time. So, I mean, it's calmed down a bit now.
Yeah, the plaudits much deserved, but I think you've got to take that level of attention with a pinch of salt because
Yeah.
it's the social media world isn't always very real, is it?
No, not at all. No, exactly. And I think what was also interesting is that a lot of people just took from it was what, a minute. And I sometimes think, did you actually go away and
Hmm.
do any research on this, or you're just taking it purely on that minute? Because I think a lot of people don't. They see something on social media and they just think, oh, that's it. And then they don't think about going away and going. Whereas actually, although I'm quite geeky, so if I see something, I go off and I will read all the books and I will. But I don't think a lot of people do that. That was the other thing I found quite interesting about it is that people were making judgments just based on that tiny bit of film, so
But thank you for encouraging people to sign up as members of ours. And it leads me into the last thing I was going to say before we wrap up, which is thank you to everyone for attending. We really appreciate it. We really enjoy these sessions. Thank you especially if you made a donation when you registered for the event. It's really important that we are able to bring in these kind of donations in order to carry on our work. We do always say if you're not already, please do consider becoming a member because it's the best way to support us, not only financially, but also you're adding your voice to this growing movement of people that value traditional craft skills. And yeah, the more people we can add to that, the louder our voice will be to government and policymakers and funders. So thank you very much. And we will wrap up with a final question. Let me just remove that. So, yeah, just to wrap up then, what are your hopes for the future of passementerie and what do you think we need to do collectively in order to realize them?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm 62 now, so my future in it, it's like I would like to retire at some point because I'm getting quite tired now. But I probably won't because it would be quite difficult to walk away from something that has been such a big part of my life and, is such a big part of the way I express myself. For the future, well, obviously, I hope that it carries on. I mean, I think that I would like to see people being a little bit more, um, and I think this is general. This is a general thing. This isn't just about passementerie, but I would like to see people being a bit more creative, because I think there's an issue with creativity at the moment. I think people don't quite understand. They look at something and they go, "Oh, that's nice. I'm going to do that," and they do that. They don't go away and think, "How can I?" This is what I was talking before,
Mhm.
is that I think people need to really look at what they're going to do. I think people need to do more research into before they go into things to see if there's a place for them there. I think with the passementerie, I think that it, what we need people coming in who are going to bring in new forms of customer. So that because at the moment, what they're doing is they're just emulating what's already out there and they're marketing it in the same way. So they're going to the same people. You want to bring in, do something different. So someone who doesn't know about it, go, oh my God, that's amazing. Well, I never bought it because I never saw anything that I could buy. And here is something. We want to expand it. And we want to get out there. So we want to take it out of its remit. We want to stop it just not being this sort of pretty nice thing that goes on cushions. Let's look at it in a different way. Let's look at it, in different contexts. I mean, I think that was so inspiring about the makers camp is that, they were making kind of cords out of suede and leather and tying things together and seeing what they could do. And that's what I want to see. I want to see a bit more individualistic creativity going on rather than just I'm going to just do, what everyone else is doing. That's the way we move it on. We get more people doing their thing.
Wonderful. A great bit of advice to end on. The hour's flown past so quickly. We had twice as many questions as we've been able to get through, twice as many slides, so many questions in the chat. We will send a transcript of the chat to Jessica afterwards, so at least she's had a chance to look at your questions. Apologies if we didn't get a chance to voice them. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jessica, so much. It's been
Thank you.
amazing. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week and yeah, the long weekend. Something to look forward to.
Oh, I'm making tassels this
Oh,
weekend.
I'm
There
sure,
you
yeah.
go. A weaver's work is never done.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Jessica.
you.
Thank you, everyone.